"I believe you're in the wrong cabin, dear. Coach boarding is from the rear." The words cut through the exclusive first-class cabin of Atlas Airways Flight 207, dripping with condescension and privilege. Caroline Price, senior partner at Pinnacle Consulting, delivered them with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to putting others in their place. Her cream linen suit, perfectly styled blonde hair, and Cartier watch broadcast her status to everyone in the cabin. The woman sitting in seat 1A looked up calmly. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, dressed in a navy blue cashmere tracksuit with no visible logos. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth or power, just comfort and quiet confidence. "I'm quite sure I'm in the right place," she replied, her voice level and controlled. Caroline's mouth tightened with annoyance. She was running late for boarding after an important client call had kept her in the lounge, and now this inconvenience. She waved her boarding pass impatiently. "These seats are very expensive. I'm sure it was an honest mistake. Your seat is probably 31A, not 1A." The gate agent should have caught it. Around them, the opulent first-class cabin of Atlas Airways Flight 207 hummed with uncomfortable tension. The private suites, arranged in a 1-1-1 configuration, offered ultimate luxury with hand-stitched leather seats that converted to fully flat beds, personal wardrobes, and 32-inch entertainment screens. Other passengers, a tech entrepreneur, a film producer, a retired athlete, pretended to be absorbed in their pre-flight routines, but their attention was fixed on the unfolding drama. A flight attendant approached cautiously. "Perhaps I can help. Let me check your boarding passes." Caroline handed hers over triumphantly. "You'll see I'm assigned to 1A. I always am." The flight attendant, Carlos Mendez according to his nameplate, studied both boarding passes carefully. "Miss Harrington, your assigned seat is actually 1C across the aisle." He pointed to an identical suite on the right side of the cabin. Caroline's face flushed. "That's impossible. My assistant knows I always book 1A. It must be a system error." She turned back to the woman. "How did you even get this seat? Did you use points or some sort of upgrade voucher?" The implication hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The woman in 1A finally set her tablet down completely. "My boarding pass, my seat assignment. That's really all that matters here." She extended her hand to Carlos. "May I?" Carlos returned her boarding pass with a professional nod, though keen observers might have noticed a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Ms. Harrington." Carlos said 1C offers identical amenities and service. "I'd be happy to help you get settled." Caroline didn't move. Instead, her gaze performed an obvious assessment of the woman in 1A. "I don't mean to be difficult, but I've flown this route monthly for years. There's clearly been a mistake. Perhaps we should ask the purser or the captain to sort this out." 2 rows behind them, a young woman with a sleek camera phone and an Instagram-perfect appearance began recording discreetly. Sofia Rodriguez, travel influencer with 3 million followers, sensed a moment worth capturing. An elderly businessman in 4B glanced up from his newspaper, frowning at Caroline's tone, while a middle-aged couple exchanged knowing looks. They'd witnessed this type of behavior before. Ms. Harrington, the woman in 1A, said finally, "I understand your preference, but preferences aren't guarantees. Your assigned seat is 1C. I suggest you take it so we can all enjoy an on-time departure." The standoff had now drawn the attention of every passenger in the first-class cabin. The air crackled with tension as Elizabeth Harrington faced a choice: accept reality or escalate further. "Who exactly do you think you are?" Elizabeth asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "Do you have any idea who I am or what I do?" The woman in 1A simply smiled, a small composed expression that never reached her eyes. "No," she said quietly, "but I'm beginning to learn." 8 hours earlier, Jasmine Reynolds had woken in her Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park. While most CEOs of major airlines started their days with executive meetings and crisis management, Jasmine had a different ritual on quarterly review days. She became invisible. Her closet, normally filled with power suits and designer dresses for board meetings and media appearances, had a special section. Simple, high-quality clothes without logos or flashy details. Clothing that signaled comfort rather than status. She selected a navy blue cashmere tracksuit, pulled her hair back in a simple bun, wore minimal jewelry, and applied no makeup. The CEO of Atlas Airways disappeared, and a regular passenger emerged. Quarterly undercover flight day. Her assistant Jennifer Thompson asked, handing her a simple leather portfolio containing her standard review forms. "The only way to know if we're actually delivering on our promises," Jasmine replied, checking her watch. Not the diamond-encrusted one from the board, but a simple timepiece her father had given her when she graduated from business school. At 41, Jasmine Reynolds had accomplished what industry analysts had deemed impossible. She had built Atlas Airways from a 2-route regional carrier into the 5th largest airline in America in just 9 years, with the highest customer satisfaction scores in the industry. Forbes had recently featured her on their cover as the future of flight, the youngest black woman to found and lead a major airline. But Jasmine never forgot how she'd started. Her father had worked as a baggage handler for 35 years, coming home with stories of how airlines treated different passengers. They remember the first-class tickets he'd told her, but they forget the first-class humans. When she'd earned her MBA and joined the management track at Legacy Airlines, she'd promised herself she would create something different. After 7 years of hitting glass ceiling after glass ceiling, she'd left to start Atlas with a radically different approach to air travel. Every passenger deserved dignity, regardless of ticket price. At 27, Jasmine had pitched her airline concept to 118 venture capitalists. 116 had rejected her outright. One told her, "Maybe try a hair salon instead. Your people are good at that." Another suggested she find a nice white man to be the face of the company. She remembered each rejection, each subtle and not so subtle dismissal. They had forged her into steel. Her quarterly ritual of flying incognito had started with her very first route. "You can't see the leaks from the executive suite," she'd explained when board members questioned the practice. "You have to sit in the cabin." Today's flight was special. The New York to Los Angeles flagship route on their newest A380, configured with their most luxurious first-class suites. Seat 1A held particular significance for Jasmine. When she'd designed the cabin layout, she'd had a small tribute etched into the armrest, "For William Reynolds, who taught me everyone deserves to fly with dignity." Her father had never experienced first class. Once dressed in his Sunday best for a family funeral, he'd been redirected from the first-class line, despite holding the correct ticket. "Not your seat," the gate agent had said without even checking his boarding pass. That memory had fueled Jasmine's determination to transform air travel. What Caroline Price couldn't see was the small engraving hidden on the inner armrest of seat 1A, "For my father who never got to fly first class." It was Jasmine's silent tribute to the man who'd inspired her love of aviation, who'd worked 3 jobs but was always denied the courtesy and respect of premium travel. Of all the seats Caroline could have tried to claim, she'd chosen the one that represented Jasmine's entire purpose for building Atlas. As she prepared for her quarterly flight, Jasmine reviewed Atlas's latest metrics. Customer satisfaction at 92%. Industry leading, but still not perfect. On-time performance at 94.3%. Excellent, but room for improvement. Employee satisfaction at 89%. Significantly above industry average, but below her target of 95%. But these weren't just typical metrics. Atlas pioneered what Jasmine called dignity metrics, specifically measuring how valued passengers felt throughout their journey. Their proprietary Dignity Interaction Score tracked elements like eye contact, duration use of passengers' names, response time to requests, and courtesy during service interactions. These measurements directly correlated with customer loyalty and word-of-mouth recommendations, proving that dignity wasn't just good ethics, it was good business. Numbers told one story, the actual experience would tell another. Jennifer handed her a boarding pass for seat 1A. The system flags it as reserved for you even when you book under the review protocol, but Nathan at the gate knows to treat you like any other passenger. Perfect, Jasmine replied. And the executive team, they think you're doing site visits at our LAX maintenance facility this afternoon. Your schedule is cleared until tomorrow morning's board meeting in Los Angeles. Jasmine nodded appreciatively. These undercover flights provided her most valuable insights. On her last quarterly review, she discovered that their new meal service in premium economy was being implemented inconsistently. The time before she'd noticed the boarding process for families needed refinement. Small details that executive reports missed but passengers experienced directly. As she left her penthouse, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The daughter of a baggage handler and a school teacher, she'd won a scholarship to Cornell, worked 3 jobs to afford business school at Wharton, and then faced a decade of being underestimated in the airline industry. We've studied the numbers extensively, the venture capitalist had told her when she first sought funding for Atlas. The market cannot support another major carrier, especially one founded by someone with your limited background. Limited background. The phrase was a familiar code. Too black, too female, too young. 9 years, 16 routes, and 42 aircraft. Later, Atlas Airways had not only survived but thrived. Their distinctive blue and silver planes were now fixtures at major airports nationwide. Their innovative approach to customer service had forced competitors to reevaluate their own practices. And Jasmine Reynolds, once dismissed as an industry outsider, was now recognized as a visionary. But success hadn't changed her fundamental approach, experienced the product as her customers did. Which is why, at 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, she joined the Atlas Airways priority boarding line at JFK's Terminal 5, looking like any other comfortably dressed business traveler. Elizabeth Harrington had built her reputation on destruction. As senior partner at Pinnacle Consulting, she specialized in operational optimization, a sanitized term for identifying which employees to fire, which benefits to cut, and which corners to trim. The Wall Street Journal had once profiled her as the efficiency expert, but behind her back industry, insiders used a different title, the corporate executioner. At 52, Elizabeth had perfected the art of clinical detachment. Companies didn't fail because of poor leadership or flawed products. They failed because of excess operational drag that could be eliminated. People weren't being fired. Positions were being rationalized. It wasn't personal. It was business. This calculated approach wasn't merely professional training. It was deeply personal. When Elizabeth was 19, her father's small manufacturing business had collapsed under financial pressure. He'd refused to lay off long-time employees, despite declining sales keeping workers on payroll out of loyalty until the company went bankrupt. The memory of watching her father lose everything, their home, his dignity, eventually even her mother, who left them both, had shaped Elizabeth's worldview irrevocably. She'd promised herself she'd never let sentiment interfere with sound business decisions. Efficiency wasn't just a strategy. It was a shield against the pain of attachment. Her morning had started in the Pinnacle Manhattan offices, 52 floors above the chaos of the city streets. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views that Elizabeth barely noticed anymore. On her polished mahogany desk, a single folder waited. The preliminary findings on Atlas Airways. The board wants the full presentation next week, her assistant had informed her. Mr. Blackwell was quite insistent about comprehensive recommendations. Andrew Blackwell sat on the board of Legacy Airlines Atlas's chief competitor and Jasmine Reynolds's former employer. He had personally requested Elizabeth's services, impressed by her reputation for unsentimental analysis. The assignment evaluate Atlas Airways' business model and identify weaknesses that Legacy could exploit. Elizabeth had already formed her opinion before completing the analysis. Atlas Airways was an anomaly, a feel-good story that defied market logic. Their emphasis on customer experience over cost-cutting might generate positive press, but in Elizabeth's view, it was fundamentally unsustainable. 3 years earlier, she had authored a scathing industry white paper predicting Atlas's failure within 18 months. The Economics of Excess: Why the Atlas Airways Model Cannot Succeed. The airline's continued growth had been personally irritating, a rare public miss in her otherwise impeccable prediction record. Today's flight to Los Angeles would serve dual purposes, presenting her findings to Legacy's West Coast executives and personally experiencing Atlas's much-praised service to identify its inevitable flaws. Elizabeth applied her signature coral lipstick, the finishing touch to her carefully constructed appearance. Her cream linen suit from Neiman Marcus, $200, Ferragamo heels, $750, and understated Tiffany jewelry, $12,000, created the precise image she wanted. Successful, authoritative, untouchable. Her blonde hair was maintained weekly at $400 per appointment, her manicure refreshed every 3 days. The expense was strategic. In Elizabeth's world, appearance wasn't vanity. It was armor. Her phone chimed with a text from Andrew Blackwell. Looking forward to your assessment. The Legacy Board believes Atlas is vulnerable despite appearances. We need actionable intelligence. Elizabeth smiled thinly. She specialized in finding vulnerabilities. Atlas Airways might project an image of revolutionary success, but every business had weaknesses. Every idealistically founded company eventually faced market realities. Every feel-good story had an unhappy ending if you waited long enough. Her car service delivered her to JFK with precisely the right amount of time for her to visit the third-party lounge that Atlas shared with several international carriers. Not having their own dedicated lounge at JFK was already a strike against them in Elizabeth's mental assessment. The lounge itself was unremarkable, comfortable but not exceptional. Elizabeth made notes on her tablet evaluating everything from the selection of complimentary beverages adequate to the quality of the Wi-Fi connection inconsistent. Each observation formed part of her developing narrative. Atlas Airways was a company built on promises it couldn't sustain. An important client call delayed her boarding until the final groups were being announced. Elizabeth disliked rushing, but she was confident her status would ensure appropriate treatment. As a consultant who specialized in the airline industry, she knew the unwritten rules. Platinum members, frequent route flyers, and high-value customers received preferential treatment regardless of official policies. When she finally boarded and discovered her assigned seat wasn't 1A, as she had specified, Elizabeth experienced something rare in her carefully controlled life surprise. When she found seat 1A occupied by someone who clearly didn't match her mental image of a first-class passenger, surprise turned to indignation. And when the flight attendant confirmed that her actual assignment was 1C, indignation began to transform into something Elizabeth Harrington rarely felt: uncertainty. But uncertainty was weakness, and Elizabeth had built her career on never showing weakness. So she did what had always served her well in the past. She escalated. "I need to speak with the purser," Elizabeth demanded, her voice carrying across the first-class cabin. "There's been a serious mistake with the seating assignments." Carlos Mendez maintained his professional composure. "I'll be happy to call the purser for you, Ms. Harrington, but I can confirm that seat 1C is your assigned seat for today's flight." Elizabeth's gaze hardened. "That's unacceptable. I specifically requested 1A, as I always do. I need that particular seat for work purposes." Jasmine Reynolds remained perfectly still in seat 1A, outwardly calm, though inwardly cataloging every aspect of this interaction. This wasn't just an entitled passenger. This was a masterclass in privilege dynamics that would normally be hidden from a CEO's view. Perhaps there was a system error. Elizabeth continued, her voice taking on a performative patience, as if explaining something to a child. "If you could just check again. I verified both boarding passes," Carlos responded evenly. There's no error in the system. Ms. Reynolds is confirmed for 1A, and you're confirmed for 1C. At the mention of her name, Jasmine noticed a subtle shift in Elizabeth's demeanor. A momentary calculation, a reassessment. Reynolds Elizabeth repeated, studying Jasmine more intently. Are you related to the airline's founder by any chance? Is that why you've been given preferential seating? The implication was clear. The only way this woman could have obtained the coveted seat was through special treatment or connections. My seating assignment is between me and the airline, Jasmine replied calmly. Just as yours is. Your seat is 1C. It has all the same features as 1A. Elizabeth's lips pressed into a thin line. This is about consistency and expectations. As a Platinum Executive member who flies this route monthly, certain courtesies should be extended. Carlos attempted to defuse the situation. Ms. Harrington, I apologize for any inconvenience. Would you like me to help you get settled in 1C? I can ensure you're served first once we're airborne. That's not the point, Elizabeth snapped. The point is that procedures haven't been followed. If Atlas Airways can't manage something as simple as honoring seating preferences for their most valuable customers, it raises serious questions about their operational competence. 2 rows back, Sofia Rodriguez continued recording discreetly her influencer instincts, recognizing viral content in the making. She kept her phone partially concealed behind an in-flight magazine capturing Elizabeth's increasingly demanding behavior. This is going to be interesting, she whispered to her seatmate, a young tech entrepreneur. She has no idea who she's talking to. Who is she talking to? He whispered back. Sophia just smiled. Wait and see. A distinguished older man in 2B, Thomas Bradford, though neither woman knew him by name, observed the interaction with growing interest, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. Bradford had initially opposed Jasmine's customer-centric approach during early board meetings, convinced that the airline industry's razor-thin margins couldn't support what he called dignity luxuries. Now, watching her maintain composure under direct assault, he couldn't help but admire how thoroughly she embodied the principles she'd built Atlas upon. Ms. Harrington. Carlos said, his professionalism unwavering despite the escalation. I need to ensure all passengers are seated for our on-time departure. May I assist you with your belongings in 1C? Elizabeth ignored him, focusing entirely on Jasmine now. I don't understand why this is so difficult. Surely you could move to another seat. My meetings in Los Angeles are crucial, and I need this specific seat for my workflow. Jasmine simply shook her head once. I'm not moving. Something in her tone, not hostile, not angry, just absolutely certain, caused Elizabeth to falter momentarily. But she recovered quickly, reaching into her designer handbag for her phone. Fine, I'll handle this myself. She began scrolling through contacts. I personally know several executives at major airlines. This level of customer service is simply unacceptable. The cabin atmosphere had grown increasingly uncomfortable. Other passengers exchanged glances, some embarrassed, others fascinated by the drama unfolding. This is ridiculous, Elizabeth muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear as she aggressively punched numbers into her phone. I've never been treated this way on any airline. Jasmine finally spoke, her voice level but carrying a hint of steel. Ms. Harrington, your behavior is delaying the flight for everyone. These passengers have connections to make and schedules to keep, just as you do. Don't lecture me about airline operations, Elizabeth fired back. I literally write the efficiency protocols that carriers implement nationwide. At this, Jasmine raised a single eyebrow but said nothing. Elizabeth's call connected. Michael, it's Elizabeth. I'm having an issue on this Atlas Airways flight. She proceeded to describe the situation as a service failure and a breakdown in customer prioritization. As she spoke, a new tension entered the cabin. The universal anxiety of passengers concerned about departure delays. Carlos checked his watch discreetly, clearly calculating how this situation was impacting their schedule. Elizabeth ended her call with visible frustration. My colleague agrees this is outrageous. He's contacting someone in Atlas's executive team directly. Something subtle shifted in Jasmine's expression, a fleeting hint of amusement quickly contained. Ms. Harrington Carlos intervened. The captain has requested that all passengers be seated immediately. We risk losing our departure slot. Elizabeth glanced around the cabin, suddenly aware that the other passengers' expressions had shifted from awkward discomfort to active annoyance, directed at her. "This isn't over," she said to Jasmine, then turned to Carlos. "I'll take 1C for now, but I expect this to be escalated to customer relations, and I'll need to speak with the captain once we're airborne." "Of course," Ms. Harrington Carlos replied professionally. "Let me help you with your luggage." As Elizabeth finally moved toward seat 1C, Jasmine discreetly checked her own phone, which had vibrated during the confrontation. A text from Jennifer Thompson. "Michael Westbrook from Pinnacle Consulting trying to reach you about a first-class seating issue." "Should I tell him you're in a meeting?" Jasmine typed a brief reply. "Tell him I'm unavailable until we land in LA. And Jennifer, pull everything we have on Elizabeth Harrington and Pinnacle Consulting. I want a complete profile waiting when we touch down." She slipped her phone into airplane mode and returned it to her bag, her expression betraying nothing of the calculations happening behind her composed exterior. Across the aisle, Elizabeth arranged her belongings in 1C with sharp, irritated movements, muttering about customer loyalty and preferential treatment. She made a show of opening her laptop and placing her designer handbag where it was clearly visible to the cabin. As the aircraft doors closed and the safety demonstration began, the immediate conflict paused, but the tension remained. A charged silence between the two women that everyone in the first-class cabin could feel. Neither woman knew it yet, but their confrontation was just beginning. Nathan Wilson stood at the gate podium watching the last few passengers board Flight 207. At 32, he was one of Atlas Airways' most experienced gate agents, having joined the airline in its second year of operation. He remembered when they'd operated just 2 routes with leased aircraft. Now they flew nationwide with their own distinctive fleet. He also remembered the first time he'd met Jasmine Reynolds. Unlike other airline executives who visited airports with an entourage and advance notice, she had appeared alone at his gate 3 years ago, observed the boarding process, then introduced herself and asked detailed questions about his experiences and challenges. When she had instituted the quarterly review flights, Nathan had been one of the few employees entrusted with knowledge of when she was traveling incognito. Today's flight had been flagged in the system VIP Passenger Standard Protocol. Standard Protocol meant treating her exactly like any other first-class passenger. No special announcements, no preferential treatment, nothing that would compromise her ability to experience the airline as customers did. Nathan had noticed Elizabeth Harrington's irritation when she'd arrived at the gate just as final boarding was announced. He'd also noticed her reaction when informed that her seat was 1C, not 1A. But he hadn't anticipated a confrontation. Now, watching the aircraft door close, he wondered how the situation had resolved. His desk phone rang. Gate 12. Nathan speaking. "Nathan, it's Jennifer Thompson from Ms. Reynolds' office. Just checking. Did our VIP board without issues?" Nathan hesitated. She boarded on time, but there was a situation with another passenger about seating assignments. What kind of situation? Jennifer's voice sharpened. A Ms. Harrington was quite insistent about having seat 1A. She seemed displeased when directed to her assigned seat in 1C. A pause on the line. "I see. Can you send me the passenger manifest? I need to know who else is on that flight." "Of course. Anything else I should know?" "Just keep this between us for now, Ms. Reynolds prefers to handle these situations herself." After sending the manifest, Nathan noticed a distinctive figure approaching his gate. Thomas Bradford, one of Atlas Airways' board members, immediately recognizable from company events. Mr. Bradford Nathan greeted him with surprise. "I didn't realize you were traveling today." Bradford smiled warmly. "Last-minute decision. I was hoping to catch Flight 207, but I see I'm too late. I'm afraid so, sir. The doors have just closed. I can book you on the next flight to Los Angeles in 3 hours. Bradford waved away the offer. No need. I'll make other arrangements. He glanced at the departure screen. I see Jasmine, Ms. Reynolds, is on board. Her assistant mentioned she was doing one of her review flights. Nathan maintained his professional discretion. I can't discuss specific passengers, sir. Bradford's smile widened appreciatively. Of course, that's exactly the right answer. He tapped the counter thoughtfully. She's got the best team in the business. That's why Atlas works when it shouldn't, according to the industry experts. You know, Nathan said, lowering his voice slightly when I first joined Atlas, I was skeptical about all the extra training on passenger dignity. It seemed excessive compared to other airlines I'd worked for. But now I can't imagine working anywhere else. The culture she's built. It makes a difference. Bradford nodded. I was once a skeptic too. Told her to her face that her dignity metrics were a waste of resources that should go toward fleet expansion. His expression grew thoughtful. I've never been happier to be proven wrong. Meanwhile, in the Atlas Airways corporate headquarters 20 blocks from JFK, Lucia Hernandez was reviewing customer experience metrics when Jennifer Thompson's call came through. We might have a situation on the quarterly review flight, Jennifer explained after ensuring they were speaking privately. As head of customer experience, Lucia was one of the few people aware of Jasmine's undercover flights. What kind of situation a consultant named Elizabeth Harrington from Pinnacle Consulting made a scene about seating assignments. She tried to displace Ms. Reynolds from 1A. Lucia sat up straighter. Pinnacle Consulting. The downsizing specialists. The very same. Her boss just called trying to reach Ms. Reynolds directly about a first-class seating issue. I'm pulling background information now. Lucia felt a chill. This isn't random. Pinnacle specializes in airline restructuring. Remember what they did to Coastal Airways last year? 3,000 jobs eliminated routes, slashed customer satisfaction in free fall. You think she's targeting Atlas? I think it's quite a coincidence that one of their senior partners is on our flagship route making demands of our CEO without knowing who she is. Lucia began typing rapidly. I'm checking our investor relations database. Let's see who might have engaged Pinnacle recently. Across the country in Los Angeles, Daniel Foster prepared for his return trip to New York. As one of Atlas Airways' senior pilots, he was scheduled to captain the return leg of Flight 207 later that evening. His phone chimed with a text from Carlos Mendez, a flight attendant he'd known for years. Interesting dynamics on the inbound flight. The founder is doing one of her mystery shops. Had a run-in with some consultant type at boarding, keeping an eye on things. Daniel smiled slightly. He'd flown with Jasmine Reynolds on one of her first review flights and had been impressed by her genuine interest in the operational details that affected crew performance. Unlike executives at his previous airline who demanded special treatment, she insisted on experiencing exactly what passengers experienced. Keep me posted, he texted back. Anything I should be aware of for the return flight? Nothing safety-related, Carlos replied. Just a fascinating study in contrasting leadership styles. Daniel put down his phone, remembering his own encounter with Elizabeth Harrington 2 years earlier at an industry conference. She'd been presenting on efficiency optimization for airlines advocating for reduced legroom and economy to accommodate more seats per aircraft. When he'd questioned the impact on passenger comfort, she'd dismissed his concerns. Passengers will tolerate whatever discomfort comes with the lowest fare. Jasmine's approach couldn't be more different, viewing comfort not as a luxury, but as a basic dignity. In the Pinnacle Consulting offices in Manhattan, Michael Westbrook frowned at his phone. Elizabeth's call about her seating issue had been irritating, exactly the kind of trivial matter he didn't have time for. But as senior partner and Elizabeth's direct supervisor, he'd made the courtesy call to Atlas Airways as requested. The response had been unusual. Rather than the typical flustered customer relations representative eager to placate a potentially valuable client, he'd reached Jennifer Thompson, who had calmly informed him that she would pass his concerns to the appropriate person once the flight landed. When he'd mentioned Elizabeth's name and emphasized her importance as a Pinnacle senior partner, Jennifer had remained impressively unmoved. "I understand, Mr. Westbrook. All our passengers are important to us. I'll ensure your concerns are addressed when the aircraft arrives in Los Angeles." The response had been professional but firm. Not at all what he'd expected from an airline facing pressure from a powerful consulting firm. It made him wonder what else about Atlas Airways might defy their expectations. Michael glanced at the report on his desk. Elizabeth's preliminary analysis of Atlas, which concluded that their customer-centric business model was financially untenable, and recommended a restructuring plan that would eliminate their distinctive services while reducing their workforce by 40%. The report aligned perfectly with what Legacy Airlines wanted to hear. The question was whether it aligned with reality. At 36,000 feet over Pennsylvania, Elizabeth Harrington seethed quietly in Seat 1C, making detailed notes about what she perceived as service failures. Across the aisle, Jasmine Reynolds appeared to be working on her tablet, occasionally glancing around the cabin with an evaluative eye that most would mistake for casual observation. Between them, Carlos Mendez moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, alert to the underlying tensions while ensuring all passengers received the exceptional service Atlas prided itself on. And above them, Captain Anita Diaz guided the aircraft westward, blissfully unaware of the power dynamics playing out in first class, dynamics that would eventually affect everyone connected to Atlas Airways. "Excuse me, but your bag is in my way." Elizabeth Harrington's voice cut through the calm atmosphere of the first-class cabin 3 hours into the flight. The early tensions had subsided as passengers settled into their routines, but Elizabeth had been quietly documenting every perceived flaw in Atlas's service for her report. Jasmine Reynolds looked up from her tablet where she'd been reviewing actual passenger satisfaction data while appearing to watch a movie. "I'm sorry. Your tote bag?" Elizabeth said, pointing to Jasmine's simple leather bag partially visible beneath the ottoman portion of her suite. "It's extending into the aisle and I need to access the lavatory." The bag was barely protruding, certainly not enough to impede passage in the spacious first-class cabin. Both women knew this wasn't about the bag. Of course, Jasmine replied calmly, tucking the bag completely under her seat. "My apologies." Instead of proceeding to the lavatory, Elizabeth remained standing, looking down at Jasmine with poorly concealed disdain. "I've been observing the service on this flight and I have to say I'm disappointed. Atlas Airways has quite the reputation, but it's clearly more marketing than substance." Jasmine raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "The meal service was delayed by 12 minutes, Elizabeth continued. "The wine selection is adequate but not exceptional, and the cabin temperature fluctuates noticeably." She gestured around the cabin. "For the premium, they charge one expects perfection." Carlos approached with professional concern. "Is everything all right, Ms. Harrington?" "Actually, no," Elizabeth replied. "I was just sharing my observations with Ms. Reynolds here. As someone who evaluates airline operations professionally, I can identify numerous inefficiencies in your service model." Carlos maintained his composure. "I'm sorry to hear that. I'd be happy to address any specific concerns. It's a comprehensive issue with how Atlas approaches luxury service, too focused on superficial touches rather than consistent execution." Jasmine watched this performance with interest. This wasn't just an entitled passenger. This was something more targeted. The mention of professional evaluation confirmed her suspicions about why Elizabeth Harrington was on her airline. "If you have specific feedback," Jasmine offered, "I'm sure Atlas would be interested in hearing it through the proper channels." Elizabeth's smile was cold. "Oh, they'll hear it. My firm specializes in operational restructuring for transportation companies. We identify inefficiencies and eliminate them." Several nearby passengers glanced up at this exchange. Thomas Bradford in 2B was now openly watching his interest no longer disguised. "That sounds fascinating," Jasmine said. "Which airline engaged your services to evaluate Atlas?" Elizabeth hesitated, suddenly aware she might have revealed too much. "I'm not at liberty to discuss client relationships." "Of course," Jasmine nodded. "Confidentiality is important." She paused. "Though it seems unusual to conduct competitive research so openly." Elizabeth's expression hardened. "I'm simply experiencing the product as any passenger would. There's nothing improper about that. Nothing improper about attempting to displace another passenger from their assigned seat. About delaying departure with demands for special treatment. About critiquing service standards to a fellow passenger rather than through customer feedback channels." The challenge in Jasmine's tone was subtle but unmistakable. Something shifted in the dynamic between them. Jasmine was no longer passively absorbing Elizabeth's behavior. She was responding to it. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "Who exactly are you?" "You seem unusually interested in defending an airline's business practices." "I'm someone who believes in respectful discourse and professional integrity," Jasmine replied evenly. Elizabeth snorted dismissively. Professional integrity. From someone who probably used points or some diversity program to access first class, that's rich. A collective intake of breath rippled through the cabin. The comment had crossed a line and everyone knew it. Sofia Rodriguez, still recording discreetly, zoomed in on both women's faces. The elderly businessman who had been watching the interaction visibly winced at Elizabeth's words, while a flight attendant passing by froze momentarily in shock. Jasmine's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes darkened. She rose slowly from her seat, standing at her full height, which put her several inches taller than Elizabeth. Despite her casual attire, something in her posture commanded attention, a quiet authority that seemed to expand to fill the space around her. "Ms. Harrington," she said, her voice calm but carrying clearly throughout the cabin. "I don't need to prove I belong here. I don't need to justify my presence in this seat or on this aircraft." "Well, Elizabeth began. "I'm not finished." Jasmine interrupted, her tone still measured but brooking no argument. "You've spent this entire flight making assumptions. About me, about this airline, about what constitutes value and quality. You've been cataloging perceived failures while creating the most significant disturbance this cabin has experienced." Elizabeth took an involuntary step back, something uncertain flickering across her features. "You asked who I am," Jasmine continued. "I'm Jasmine Reynolds." She paused, allowing the name to register. In the stunned silence, understanding began to dawn on several faces throughout the cabin. "I founded Atlas Airways 9 years ago. I designed this aircraft's interior, selected the wine you criticized, and approved the temperature variance that allows passengers to sleep comfortably while remaining alert during meal service." Elizabeth's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no words emerged. The tablet she'd been clutching slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor with a sound that echoed through the now silent cabin. "Seat 1A is mine," Jasmine concluded quietly. "Not because I demanded it, not because of status or privilege or points. It's mine because I built this airline seat by seat and route by route." The cabin fell absolutely silent. Even the ambient engine noise seemed to recede in the wake of this revelation. A young mother in row 5 covered her mouth in shock, while the tech entrepreneur who had been watching discreetly actually applauded softly before catching himself. Carlos, maintaining his professionalism despite the dramatic turn of events, stepped forward. "Ms. Reynolds, can I get you anything?" "I'm fine." "Thank you, Carlos," Jasmine replied with a warm smile that transformed her previously neutral expression. "But perhaps Ms. Harrington would like a moment to collect herself. She seems unwell." Indeed, Elizabeth stood frozen in the aisle, her complexion ashen, her confident demeanor shattered. The realization of what had just transpired, who she had been attempting to displace, who she had been criticizing, who she had insulted, crashed over her in a wave of professional horror. I didn't, she stammered. Know who I was? Jasmine finished for her. That's rather the point. None of us know who we're sitting beside on an aircraft, which is why dignity and respect should be universal, not contingent on status or recognition. Jasmine gestured to 1C. Your seat is getting cold, Ms. Harrington. I suggest you use the lavatory as you intended, and then return to it. We still have 3 hours of flight time remaining, and I'd like all our passengers to be comfortable. The subtle emphasis on all was unmistakable. Elizabeth managed a stiff nod before hurrying to the lavatory, her earlier confidence replaced by visible mortification. As Jasmine returned to her seat, she noticed Thomas Bradford watching her with undisguised admiration. She acknowledged him with a small nod, recognizing the board member who had championed her customer-first philosophy against more traditional voices. Sofia Rodriguez had stopped recording, but her fingers flew across her phone screen, crafting a social media post that would reach her 3 million followers within minutes. Just witnessed the most incredible moment on #Atlas Airways flight. Woman tried to bully another passenger out of first class, then turned ghost white when she realized it was the founder of the airline. @Jasmine. Reynolds. @wrong seat. Wrong person. Classic moment. The power dynamic in the cabin had irrevocably shifted. As Elizabeth eventually emerged from the lavatory and slipped quietly back into 1C, she found herself in an unfamiliar position. One of exposure and vulnerability rather than authority and control. For Jasmine Reynolds, this moment validated everything she had built Atlas Airways to be. Not just a carrier that transported people from origin to destination, but one that recognized the humanity in every passenger regardless of their status or appearance. And for everyone else in the cabin, it was a moment they would recount for years to come. The day they witnessed someone discover in the most public and uncomfortable way possible that appearances can be dangerously deceiving. News travels at the speed of Wi-Fi in the digital age. Sofia Rodriguez's initial post hit Instagram while Flight 207 was still over the Midwest. Within minutes, it had accumulated thousands of likes. Within an hour, it had been shared across multiple platforms. A travel blogger with connections at Aviation Daily picked it up, adding context about Jasmine Reynolds' remarkable career and Atlas Airways' disruption of traditional airline business models. By the time the aircraft crossed into Nevada airspace, Nanchard Atlas moment and #wrong seat wrong CEO were trending on Twitter. Without video, which Sofia had wisely held back pending legal review, the incident took on the quality of digital folklore. A corporate justice story that resonated across industries and demographics. Inside the aircraft, the recognition cascade played out more subtly but no less dramatically. The first-class flight attendant who had been serving Elizabeth throughout the flight approached her with the same professional courtesy, but his demeanor had subtly changed. The deference had been replaced by simple politeness. When Elizabeth requested a third glass of champagne, he brought it promptly but without the eager-to-please attitude he'd displayed earlier. "Will there be anything else, Ms. Harrington?" he asked, his tone perfectly proper but lacking warmth. Elizabeth shook her head, unable to meet his eyes. She had retreated into her seat, laptop closed, phone dark, all her earlier documentation abandoned. The devastating professional implications of her behavior were beginning to crystallize in her mind. As she stared out the window at the vast expanse of American heartland below, Elizabeth felt a nauseating wave of realization. This wasn't just an embarrassing interaction with a CEO. It was a career-defining mistake captured on video. The kind of error that features in business school case studies about how not to conduct oneself professionally. Every assumption she'd made about Jasmine's qualifications, about her right to occupy a premium space, about the fundamental business model of Atlas Airways, had been catastrophically wrong. And unlike her previous missteps that had been smoothed over by corporate PR, this one had played out in front of witnesses with smartphones. Across the aisle, Jasmine continued working on her tablet, occasionally making notes, but otherwise giving no indication that anything extraordinary had occurred. Yet the other passengers now viewed her through an entirely different lens. A tech CEO from 3A approached under the pretense of visiting the lavatory. "Ms. Reynolds," he said quietly as he passed, "just wanted to say, I've been flying Atlas exclusively since you launched the San Francisco route. Best business decision I ever made." "Thank you," Jasmine replied with a genuine smile. "I appreciate your loyalty." As he returned to his seat, others found reasons to pass by 1A. A stretch break, a conversation with a companion, a request for a magazine from the front galley. Each included a subtle acknowledgement, a respectful nod, a whispered compliment, a gesture of appreciation. Thomas Bradford finally abandoned pretense altogether and moved to the empty seat beside Jasmine during the coffee service. That, he said without preamble, was the single greatest demonstration of our company values I've ever witnessed. Jasmine's expression remained composed. "I didn't reveal myself to make a point, Thomas. It became necessary. Which is exactly why it was so powerful," Bradford replied. "You didn't pull rank at the beginning when she was demanding your seat. You didn't have her removed from the flight or downgraded. You gave her every opportunity to correct her own behavior." "Everyone deserves dignity," Jasmine said simply. "Even difficult customers." Bradford glanced toward Elizabeth, who was staring out her window, shoulders rigid with tension. "She's not just a difficult customer. Pinnacle Consulting means Legacy Airlines. They're making another run at us. I suspected as much when she mentioned operational restructuring." Jasmine sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "The timing aligns with their quarterly board meeting." "This changes our strategy," Bradford said. "They clearly don't understand our business model if they sent Elizabeth Harrington to evaluate it. The fact that she couldn't even recognize our founder, it tells us exactly what they're looking for." Jasmine agreed. "And what they're blind to." In the main cabin, a flight attendant was showing her colleague something on her phone during a brief break in service. "It's going viral," she whispered. Sofia Rodriguez posted about what happened in first class. Apparently, some consultant tried to kick the founder out of her own seat. The news rippled through the crew quietly but thoroughly. By the time the captain made the announcement to prepare for landing, every Atlas employee on board knew what had transpired. On the ground, the story was spreading through professional channels as well. Jennifer Thompson had compiled a comprehensive brief on Elizabeth Harrington and Pinnacle Consulting, which she shared with Lucia Hernandez and other key executives. "This is a targeted attack," Lucia concluded after reviewing the materials. "Pinnacle only works with companies planning major workforce reductions. Their involvement with Legacy suggests they're preparing a competitive response to our market growth." "Ms. Reynolds already suspected as much," Jennifer replied. "She's requested a full board meeting immediately upon landing. At Los Angeles International Airport, the Atlas Airways ground team received an unusual alert VIP arrival standard protocol plus media awareness. The cryptic addition of media awareness put them on alert for possible press presence, though no further explanation was provided." Daniel Foster, preparing for the return flight to New York, received another text from Carlos. "You won't believe what happened. CEO revealed herself to a Pinnacle consultant who was being horrible. Entire cabin witnessed. Going viral online." Daniel texted back immediately. "Need details. Media involvement. Unknown," Carlos replied. "But passenger Sofia Rodriguez is an influencer with millions of followers, already posting about it. As Flight 207 began its final approach into LAX, the cascading recognition had transformed the atmosphere on board. What had begun as a typical transcontinental flight had become a defining moment in Atlas Airways' corporate story, a real-time demonstration of the values the airline had been built upon. For Jasmine Reynolds, it was an unplanned but powerful affirmation of her vision. For Elizabeth Harrington, it was a career catastrophe unfolding in slow motion. And for everyone witnessing it, either in person or through the rapidly spreading digital narrative, it was a rare glimpse of authentic corporate leadership in action. Not through press releases or marketing campaigns, but through quiet dignity in the face of disrespect. The aircraft touched down at LAX right on schedule despite the in-flight drama. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, no one in first class rushed to stand. Instead, all eyes turned to Jasmine Reynolds, waiting to follow her lead. She remained seated, allowing Elizabeth Harrington to gather her belongings and exit first, a final demonstration of grace that was lost on no one. The jet bridge at LAX connected Flight 207 not just to the terminal, but to a new reality for both Jasmine Reynolds and Elizabeth Harrington. Elizabeth exited first, her earlier confidence replaced by rigid self-consciousness. As she emerged into the terminal, she was startled to find a small group of Atlas Airways executives waiting, not for her, but for the woman she had spent the flight antagonizing. Jasmine followed moments later, immediately recognized by her team despite her casual attire. Lucia Hernandez stepped forward, first tablet in hand. "Welcome to Los Angeles, Ms. Reynolds," she said professionally, though her eyes conveyed much more. "The car is waiting, and the board has been notified of your request for an immediate meeting." "Thank you," Lucia Jasmine replied. Then, noticing Elizabeth hovering uncertainly nearby, she made a decision. "Ms. Harrington, a moment of your time." Elizabeth froze, then turned slowly, her expression a mixture of dread and resignation. "Ms. Reynolds, I want to apologize for." Jasmine held up a hand, stopping the rehearsed apology before it could unfold. "This isn't about apologies. This is about clarity." Her voice remained conversational, but her words were precise and deliberate. "You're preparing a report on Atlas Airways for Legacy Airlines, evaluating our business model for vulnerabilities that could be exploited." It wasn't a question. Elizabeth's shocked expression confirmed the accuracy. "Your analysis," Jasmine continued, "will likely conclude that our customer-centric approach is financially unsustainable. You'll recommend route reductions, staff cuts, and service downgrades as necessary steps toward profitability." "How did you," Elizabeth began, then stopped herself. "Because it's the same playbook Pinnacle has used at Coastal Metropolitan and Sunjet Airways. Cut costs, reduce service, eliminate inefficiencies, which always means people's jobs and passengers' comfort." Jasmine's tone remained calm, but her eyes had hardened. "The problem, Ms. Harrington, is that you don't understand what you're evaluating." Around them, the Atlas executive team maintained professional expressions, but their attention was entirely focused on this unexpected confrontation. A few travelers passing by slowed their pace, sensing the tension in the interaction. "I've been doing this for 20 years, Elizabeth said stiffly, attempting to reclaim some professional dignity. "I understand airline economics perfectly well. You understand spreadsheets and profit margins," Jasmine corrected her. "You don't understand people, which is why you couldn't recognize the CEO of the airline you were supposedly evaluating even when sitting directly across from her for 5 hours. Elizabeth had no response to this. "Your approach treats passengers as units and employees as expenses," Jasmine continued. "Atlas was built on the opposite premise that treating people with dignity creates sustainable value. Our load factors are 12% above industry average. Our customer retention is 28% higher. Our employee turnover is 40% lower. Our profit margins have exceeded industry standards for 6 consecutive quarters." She stepped closer, her voice lowering slightly. "Those metrics don't appear in your traditional analysis because they don't fit your cost-cutting narrative. But they're why we're profitable while following none of Pinnacle's recommended best practices." The terminal around them continued its normal operations, passengers streaming past announcements echoing overhead. But in the small bubble surrounding the two women, time seemed suspended. "What happens now?" Elizabeth finally asked, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. Now Jasmine considered her. Now you have a choice. You can complete your report for Legacy Airlines based on superficial observations and predetermined conclusions. Or you can recognize that today has given you unique insight few consultants ever receive. Meaning. Meaning. You've inadvertently tested our business model in the most authentic way possible. You experienced our service as a difficult customer making unreasonable demands, and you witnessed firsthand how we prioritize dignity over expedience. Jasmine glanced at her watch. I have a board meeting to attend. Your firm has a contractual obligation to Legacy, which I respect. But know this, whatever you report to them, I'll be preparing my own report about today's interactions for my board and our major investors. The implication was clear. Elizabeth's behavior would be documented and shared among the corporate circles both women inhabited. This wasn't personal, Elizabeth said, an edge of defensiveness entering her voice. It became personal the moment you suggested I didn't belong in first class. Jasmine replied evenly. But you're right. What matters now are the business implications. You have my email if you'd like to discuss further. With that, Jasmine turned to her team. Let's go. We have decisions to make. As the Atlas executives moved toward the exit, Elizabeth remained rooted in place, the professional certainty that had defined her career suddenly on uncertain ground. Elizabeth's phone began vibrating in her purse. Pulling it out, she saw multiple missed calls and text messages, all from Michael Westbrook. The most recent text simply read, "Call me immediately. Situation critical." With shaking fingers, she dialed her boss's number. He answered on the first ring. Elizabeth. What the hell happened? His voice was tight with controlled fury. I'm getting calls from our PR team, from Legacy's board, from half a dozen industry contacts. There's a viral post claiming you tried to kick Jasmine Reynolds out of her own first-class cabin. I didn't know who she was, Elizabeth said weakly, the excuse sounding pathetic even to her own ears. That's the problem. Michael exploded. You're supposed to be our aviation expert. How could you not recognize the CEO of the company you're evaluating? The official photos show her in business attire. Not. Stop talking. Michael interrupted. This is worse than you realize. Sofia Rodriguez is apparently sitting on video footage of the entire interaction. Our PR team is in damage control mode, but they need to know exactly what was said. Elizabeth's stomach tightened. What about the Legacy contract? Andrew Blackwell called me personally 10 minutes ago. They're reconsidering our engagement in light of recent developments. The euphemism was clear. Legacy Airlines was preparing to terminate their contract with Pinnacle. I'm flying back tonight, Elizabeth said, attempting to regain some control of the situation. We can strategize in person tomorrow. No. Michael's response was immediate and final. Stay in Los Angeles. The board is meeting an emergency session at 5 p.m. Eastern. I need you available by video conference. The board. Elizabeth repeated, disbelief coloring her voice. This is being escalated to the board. Your confrontation with Jasmine Reynolds has potentially compromised a major client relationship, created significant reputational damage, and called into question our research methodologies. Yes, Elizabeth, this is a board matter. The call ended abruptly, leaving Elizabeth staring at her phone in the middle of the busy terminal. For 20 years, she had delivered efficiency at any cost, never concerning herself with the human impact of her recommendations. Now, in a stunning reversal, she had become the inefficiency that needed to be eliminated. 30 minutes later, Jasmine sat at the head of the conference table in Atlas Airways' Los Angeles offices. The hastily assembled board meeting had drawn 8 of the 12 board members in person, with the remainder joining virtually. I'll be brief, she began, because the situation requires immediate action. Legacy Airlines has engaged Pinnacle Consulting to identify vulnerabilities in our business model, likely in preparation for aggressive competitive moves. She recounted the in-flight confrontation, clinically emphasizing the strategic implications rather than the personal insult. Their approach confirms they fundamentally misunderstand our competitive advantage. They see our customer experience investments as unnecessary costs rather than the core driver of our profitability. Thomas Bradford, who had witnessed the confrontation firsthand, added his perspective. Elizabeth Harrington's behavior on that flight revealed everything about Pinnacle's analytical framework. They're bringing outdated metrics to evaluate a business model that's redefining those very metrics. Jasmine nodded. Which gives us an opportunity. Rather than becoming defensive, we should accelerate our differentiation strategy. She outlined a 3-part response, an immediate press release announcing expansion of Atlas's most distinctive customer experience initiatives, acceleration of their previously planned West Coast hub development, and a transparency campaign showcasing the financial performance of their customer-first business model. Legacy expects us to retreat to become more like traditional carriers under competitive pressure, she explained. We'll do the opposite. We'll double down on what makes us different. She displayed key financial metrics on the boardroom screen, our Passenger Dignity Index, which measures how respected customers feel throughout their journey, correlates directly with our industry-leading customer retention rate of 87%. Our Employee Dignity Score, tracking factors like autonomy recognition and fair treatment, has reduced training costs by 34% through decreased turnover. These aren't soft metrics. They're driving our 23% profit margin growth year over year. The board discussion was vigorous but unified. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, they had authorized a comprehensive strategic response that would reshape the competitive landscape. As the meeting concluded, Jennifer Thompson entered with an update. Ms. Reynolds, Sophia Rodriguez's initial post about the incident has reached 5 million views. Major business publications are requesting comment, and #Atlas moment is trending nationwide. CNN Business is running the headline, Atlas Airways CEO schools efficiency expert on true business value, another executive added. Bloomberg and CNBC have requested interviews. Jasmine considered this development. She had never sought the spotlight, preferring to let Atlas's service speak for itself. But sometimes leadership required visibility. Draft a statement emphasizing our commitment to treating all passengers with dignity regardless of status or circumstance, she instructed. No direct mention of Elizabeth Harrington or Pinnacle. This isn't about individuals. It's about values. Jennifer nodded, then hesitated. There's one more thing. Elizabeth Harrington has requested a meeting tomorrow morning before your return flight. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Schedule it at our downtown office, not the airport lounge. I want her on our territory, not neutral ground. As the room cleared, Thomas Bradford remained behind. You know, he said thoughtfully, in all my years in corporate America, I've never seen someone handle a direct challenge with such composure. Most CEOs would have had her removed from the flight or publicly humiliated. Neither approach would align with our values, Jasmine replied simply. Exactly. Which is why you've built something remarkable. Bradford gathered his papers. Legacy Airlines doesn't just want to compete with Atlas, they want to discredit your entire approach to business. Today, you proved why they can't. Across Los Angeles at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Elizabeth Harrington sat alone in her suite, staring at the muted television where her professional humiliation was playing out on CNBC. The banner headline read, Consultant Confronts Wrong. CEO, Atlas Airways founder, turns industry moment viral. Her phone continued to vibrate with messages and calls, but she had stopped answering. What could she possibly say? That she had failed to recognize one of the most distinctive executives in the aviation industry, that she had revealed confidential client work in a public setting, that she had exposed her firm's entire methodology to the very target they were supposed to be analyzing, at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. Elizabeth connected to the Pinnacle board meeting via video conference. The faces that greeted her, once deferential to her expertise, now ranged from grim to openly hostile. The situation has deteriorated further, Michael Westbrook announced without preamble. Legacy Airlines has formally suspended our contract pending review. They claim your actions compromised the confidentiality of their competitive intelligence gathering. That's patently unfair, Elizabeth protested, struggling to maintain her professional composure. I was conducting standard observational research. There was no confidentiality breach until Jasmine Reynolds herself identified me as a consultant. That's not how it's playing in the media, the PR director countered. The narrative is that you attempted to bully the founder of Atlas out of her seat, then criticized her own airline to her face. It reads as both incompetent and unprofessional. The reputational damage extends beyond this specific engagement, Michael added. 2 other clients have requested calls with senior leadership to discuss concerns about our research methodology. Elizabeth felt the walls closing in. Her carefully constructed professional identity was unraveling with breathtaking speed. "What's our counter-strategy?" she asked, falling back on familiar territory. "That depends on what's in the video," the legal counsel replied. "If it shows you making statements that could be interpreted as discriminatory, we may need to consider a separation to protect the firm's reputation." The word landed like a physical blow. Separation. After 15 years and hundreds of successful engagements, they were discussing cutting her loose over one misjudged interaction. "I have a meeting with Jasmine Reynolds tomorrow morning," Elizabeth said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Perhaps there's an opportunity to diffuse this situation directly." Michael's expression remained skeptical. "What exactly do you hope to achieve? A mutual de-escalation? A professional understanding that benefits both parties? You no longer have the leverage for negotiation," the PR director pointed out bluntly. "Atlas is riding a wave of positive publicity while we're fighting to maintain client confidence." As the meeting continued, Elizabeth found herself in an unfamiliar position, defending actions rather than dictating strategies. The board ultimately decided to wait for the video before making final decisions about her partnership status, but the message was clear. Her future at Pinnacle was in serious jeopardy. After the call ended, Elizabeth sat motionless, staring at the darkened screen. Outside her window, the Los Angeles sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, a beautiful backdrop to the professional catastrophe unfolding in her suite. Her phone buzzed with a calendar notification, 8:00 a.m. Meeting with Jasmine Reynolds, Atlas Airways corporate offices. In 12 hours, she would face the woman whose identity she had misjudged so catastrophically, the woman whose business model she had dismissed without understanding, the woman who now held significant influence over Elizabeth's professional future. For the first time in years, Elizabeth Harrington felt something unfamiliar, genuine uncertainty about what tomorrow would bring. As she stared out the window, fragments of the day's events replayed in her mind. Not just the mortifying moment of revelation, but Jasmine's words. "None of us know who we're sitting beside on an aircraft, which is why dignity and respect should be universal, not contingent on status or recognition." Had she been wrong all along? Not just about Jasmine Reynolds, but about her entire approach to business value. The question was deeply uncomfortable, challenging the framework she had built her entire career upon. Elizabeth turned from the window and opened her laptop. Instead of preparing defenses or crafting explanations, she began researching Atlas Airways more thoroughly. Their financial performance, their customer metrics, their employee policies. For the first time, she approached the analysis not as an efficiency expert looking for costs to cut, but as a student trying to understand a different model of success. The results were startling. Atlas's financial performance didn't just match industry standards, it exceeded them in key categories, particularly long-term metrics like customer retention and market growth. Their approach wasn't just morally appealing, it was economically sound in ways her traditional analysis had completely missed. As night fell over Los Angeles, Elizabeth Harrington began to confront a possibility more unsettling than losing her partnership, that the business principles she had championed for 2 decades might be fundamentally flawed. The next morning, Elizabeth arrived at the Atlas Airways corporate campus 15 minutes early, hoping to collect herself before the meeting. Unlike the soaring glass towers that housed Pinnacle Consulting in Manhattan Atlas headquarters, was a modern 4-story structure with extensive gardens and natural light. It projected confidence without ostentation, much like its founder. The receptionist's greeting was professionally courteous, but notably lacking the deferential tone Elizabeth typically received at corporate headquarters. "Ms. Reynolds will be with you shortly. Would you like coffee while you wait?" Elizabeth declined, too nervous to trust her hands with a cup. Her phone had been silent all morning, an ominous sign that decisions about her future were being made without her input. The Pinnacle board would be reconvening at 9 a.m. Eastern, just as her meeting with Jasmine was scheduled to begin. The timing wasn't coincidental. Her career's fate likely hinged on how this conversation unfolded. 15 minutes later, Elizabeth was escorted to Jasmine's office, an airy space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden courtyard. The furnishings were elegant but functional, with notable design elements from diverse global traditions. The room conveyed authority without intimidation. Jasmine Reynolds rose from her desk as Elizabeth entered. Today, she was dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected executive authority while remaining understated. The transformation from yesterday's casual passenger to today's commanding CEO was complete. "Ms. Harrington, thank you for coming," Jasmine said, gesturing to a seating area rather than keeping the desk between them. Her tone was professional, but not warm. Ms. Reynolds Elizabeth began falling back on her practiced crisis management approach. "I want to address yesterday's unfortunate misunderstanding directly. My behavior on Flight 207 failed to meet my own professional standards, and I sincerely apologize for any discomfort caused." The apology sounded rehearsed because it was. Elizabeth had practiced variations throughout her sleepless night. Jasmine regarded her steadily. "Is that what you believe yesterday was a misunderstanding?" The question caught Elizabeth off guard. "I failed to recognize you, which led to inappropriate assumptions. The issue isn't that you didn't recognize me personally," Jasmine clarified. "The issue is that you believed someone with my appearance couldn't possibly belong in seat 1A, unless there had been a mistake or special accommodation." Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't following her anticipated script. "Your assumptions weren't simply about me," Jasmine continued. "They were about my airline, my business model, and the values that define Atlas Airways. You were evaluating us through a framework that fundamentally misunderstands what we've built." Before Elizabeth could respond, Jasmine's assistant knocked and entered. "Excuse me, Ms. Reynolds. The video has been released." Jasmine nodded. "Please display it." The large monitor on the wall illuminated with Sofia Rodriguez's carefully edited video of the previous day's confrontation. The 5-minute sequence captured key moments: Elizabeth's initial demand for seat 1A, her dismissive comments about Jasmine's right to be in first class, her suggestion that diversity vouchers might have been involved, and finally the dramatic moment when Jasmine revealed her identity. The production quality was surprisingly professional, with captions emphasizing the most damning exchanges. It ended with Jasmine's quiet but powerful statement. "Seat 1A is mine, because I built this airline seat by seat and route by route." As the video concluded, Elizabeth sat in stunned silence. Seeing the interaction from an outside perspective was profoundly unsettling. She appeared not as the confident professional she considered herself, but as exactly what Jasmine had described: someone making inappropriate assumptions based on appearance and enforcing artificial hierarchies. That video has been viewed 2.3 million times since posting 40 minutes ago, Jasmine noted calmly. It's been shared by industry leaders, celebrities, and major news outlets. Elizabeth's phone began vibrating continuously in her purse. Undoubtedly Michael Westbrook and the Pinnacle crisis team responding to the video's release. "What do you want from me?" Elizabeth finally asked, abandoning her prepared talking points. Aunt Jasmine seemed genuinely surprised by the question. I don't want anything from you, Ms. Harrington. I invited you here to offer something to you. I don't understand. A different perspective, Jasmine explained. For 15 years, you've evaluated businesses through a single lens, cost reduction as the primary path to profitability. That approach has made Pinnacle successful but left devastation in its wake. Communities lose jobs, passengers lose service, quality employees lose security. She leaned forward slightly. Atlas Airways proves there's another way. We're profitable because of our employee benefits, not despite them. We're growing because of our customer experience investments, not in spite of them. Our Dignity Engagement Score measures factors like eye contact duration, name recognition, and personalized service moments. Jasmine continued pulling up metrics on a tablet. When these scores rise, our customer retention increases by 18%, directly reducing our marketing costs by 22%. Our staff turnover has dropped to just 11% annually, in an industry that averages 37%, saving us millions in training and operational disruption costs. Elizabeth's training and dispassionate analysis warred with her current reality. Your quarterly reports show lower profit margins than legacy. Your operational costs are 22% higher per available seat mile, yet our customer retention is 28% higher, leading to lower marketing costs. Our employee turnover is 40% lower, reducing training expenses. Our load factors consistently exceed industry averages by 12%. Jasmine countered each point without referring to notes. The metrics you prioritize tell only part of the story. Elizabeth's phone continued its insistent vibration. The professional crisis unfolding in her purse demanded attention, but something kept her engaged in this unexpected conversation. What exactly are you proposing? She asked cautiously. I'm suggesting you consider that your analytical framework might be incomplete, Jasmine replied. That dignity-driven business models can outperform extraction-focused ones over the long term. And how does this address the immediate situation? It doesn't directly. Your relationship with Pinnacle and their response to yesterday's events are between you and your firm. You're bad. Jasmine's expression remained composed, but understanding why your assessment of Atlas was fundamentally flawed might help you navigate whatever comes next. For the first time, Elizabeth detected something like genuine concern in Jasmine's voice. Not pity, but a professional recognition of a career at a crossroads. The conversation was interrupted by Jennifer Thompson entering with evident urgency. Ms. Reynolds, CNBC is ready for your live segment, and Mr. Westbrook from Pinnacle Consulting is calling again, his fourth attempt. Thank you, Jennifer. Jasmine stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. Ms. Harrington, I won't pretend yesterday's interaction didn't happen or that it won't have consequences for both of us. But I hope you'll consider that there might be value in approaches to business that prioritize dignity alongside profitability. As Elizabeth exited the Atlas offices, her phone finally silenced by multiple missed calls. She felt disoriented in a way she'd never experienced professionally. Her certainties about business, about value, about her own professional identity, had been systematically challenged not through confrontation but through composed clarity. In her car, returning to the hotel, she finally checked her messages. The board meeting had been moved up. Michael Westbrook's tone had shifted from concern to barely contained fury. And most significantly, 3 major clients had suspended their engagements with Pinnacle pending resolution of leadership concerns. The final message was the most definitive. After reviewing the video evidence and consulting with legal counsel, the board has voted to terminate your partnership effective immediately. Security will meet you at the office to collect your personal items upon your return to New York. Elizabeth Harrington, who had built her career on identifying others' vulnerabilities, now faced her own professional reckoning. But strangely, as the full weight of the consequences settled over her, she felt something unexpected. Not just regret or anger, but the beginning of clarity. For 20 years, she had measured success through a single narrow lens. Perhaps it was time to reconsider what truly constituted value in business and beyond. 1 week after the viral confrontation that had transformed her career, Elizabeth Harrington sat alone in her Manhattan apartment, surrounded by the trappings of professional success that suddenly felt hollow. The view from her 42nd floor window showcased the city she had conquered but no longer felt part of. The Pinnacle Board's decision had been delivered with the same clinical efficiency she had once applied to corporate restructurings. After careful consideration of recent events and their impact on client relationships, we are terminating your partnership effective immediately. 15 years. Hundreds of successful engagements, billions in client value creation, which she now recognized had often been value extraction improving short-term metrics while undermining long-term sustainability. Her phone, once constantly buzzing with client messages and colleague consultations, remained ominously silent. Former business associates had mastered the art of professional distance, expressing sympathy while making clear they couldn't risk association with her reputational contagion. This will blow over. Michael Westbrook had assured her even while formalizing her separation from Pinnacle. Take 6 months, maybe consult independently, then return to a different firm with a refreshed approach. But as Elizabeth scrolled through yet another business publication analyzing the Atlas moment and its implications for corporate America, she wondered if anything would ever be the same. Today's Harvard Business Review featured an analysis titled, "Dignity as Competitive Advantage." The Atlas Airways case study, which examined how Jasmine Reynolds' customer-first approach had created measurable financial value through enhanced loyalty, reduced marketing costs, and superior employee retention. The article contained a quote that Elizabeth had read and reread throughout the morning. The confrontation between Reynolds and Harrington represents more than a viral moment. It embodies the collision between extractive and generative business models, one focused on cost reduction at all costs, the other on value creation through dignity-centered practices. Her doorbell rang, startling her from this uncomfortable reflection. The package delivery contained an unexpected item, a book titled Dignity Economics, with a note from Jasmine Reynolds. Thought this might interest you during your transition period. The conversation continues. The simple gesture, neither gloating nor dismissive, struck Elizabeth profoundly. The woman she had treated with such condescension was extending professional courtesy, despite having every reason not to. Later that afternoon, Elizabeth ventured out for the first time in days, walking to a small coffee shop several blocks from her building. Away from the Midtown financial district where she might be recognized, she could briefly escape the weight of professional ignominy. As she sat with her latte, Elizabeth opened her laptop and began typing. Not client presentations or efficiency analyses, but reflections on where her approach to business had gone astray. The words came slowly at first, then with increasing fluency. I built my career identifying inefficiencies. What I failed to recognize was that human dignity is not an inefficiency to be eliminated, but a value driver to be nurtured. The metrics I prioritized, cost per employee, revenue per square foot margin percentages, told an incomplete story because they failed to capture the value of belonging, purpose, and respect. As she wrote, Elizabeth experienced something unfamiliar, uncertainty about principles she had once considered self-evident. The analytical framework that had guided her entire professional life suddenly seemed partial at best, fundamentally flawed at worst. Her phone buzzed with an email notification, not from a former client or colleague, but from a business school professor. Ms. Harrington, I'm developing a case study on competing approaches to organizational value creation. Would you be willing to discuss your perspective on the Atlas Airways incident and its implications for management consulting? Elizabeth stared at the message, considering its meaning. She was being invited not as an authority on efficiency, but as an object lesson in limitations. Yet something about the request appealed to her. Perhaps sharing her experience, including her errors and reconsiderations, had value. She typed a careful reply. I would be open to discussing how my thinking has evolved regarding business value metrics. Recent events have prompted significant reconsideration of my previous analytical framework. Hitting send. Elizabeth felt a subtle shift, from defending old certainties to exploring new possibilities. It wasn't redemption or even rehabilitation, but perhaps the beginning of transformation. That evening, she received another unexpected communication, a LinkedIn message from Lucia Hernandez, Atlas Airways, Head of Customer Experience. Elizabeth, we're developing a business roundtable on dignity-centered metrics. Your perspective on the limitations of traditional efficiency frameworks would be valuable. Would you consider participating? The invitation wasn't charity. It was professional recognition that Elizabeth's experience, including her public failure, contained insights worth sharing. Her journey from certainty to humility might itself have value in the evolving conversation about business metrics. 1 week after her professional identity had shattered, Elizabeth Harrington began seeing the outline of a different path forward. Not as the corporate executioner, but as someone who understood both the allure and limitations of efficiency-focused business models. She wouldn't rebuild her former career. That was clear. But she might construct something new from the painful lessons of her public reckoning, something that incorporated dignity alongside efficiency, human value alongside financial metrics. As she drafted a reply to Lucia Hernandez, Elizabeth reflected on Jasmine Reynolds' parting words from their meeting in Los Angeles. I hope you'll consider that there might be value in approaches to business that prioritize dignity alongside profitability. At the time, she had heard those words as professional courtesy. Now she recognized them as an invitation to growth, one she was finally ready to accept. 6 months after the confrontation that had become known simply as the Atlas moment, Jasmine Reynolds stood at the podium in a packed auditorium at Harvard Business School. Behind her, a slide displayed the title of her lecture, Dignity as Driver, Measuring What Matters in Modern Business. The metrics we prioritize determine the outcomes we achieve. She began surveying the audience of MBA candidates, faculty, and business leaders. For decades, the airline industry measured success through load factors, yield management, and cost per available seat mile. These metrics created exactly what they were designed to measure: efficiency at the expense of humanity. Jasmine clicked to the next slide, displaying Atlas Airways' alternative framework. At Atlas, we expanded the measurement set to include dignity metrics, passenger experience ratings across demographic groups, employee fulfillment scores, community impact assessments. We didn't abandon traditional metrics. We contextualized them within a more complete value picture. The data she presented told a compelling story. Over the past 6 months, Atlas Airways had achieved record growth, expanded to 16 new routes, and increased market share in every region they served. Their stock had outperformed the airline index by 32%, attracting institutional investors who had previously dismissed their model as unsustainably premium. The confrontation that went viral was never about a seating assignment, Jasmine explained. It was about competing visions of value creation. One approach sees passengers as units to be processed efficiently. The other recognizes them as humans whose dignity directly impacts sustainable profitability. As she concluded her presentation, Jasmine introduced a surprise guest, Elizabeth Harrington, whose professional journey over the past 6 months had become nearly as discussed as Jasmine's own. Elizabeth brings valuable perspective on the limitations of traditional efficiency frameworks, Jasmine explained. Her willingness to publicly reassess those limitations demonstrates exactly the kind of learning mindset business leadership requires in our evolving economy. The audience's response, initially uncertain given Elizabeth's notoriety, warmed as she spoke candidly about her professional evolution, I built my career identifying inefficiencies to eliminate. What I failed to recognize was that human dignity isn't an inefficiency, it's a powerful driver of sustainable value. The joint appearance represented more than reconciliation between two executives. It symbolized a broader shift in business thinking, one that recognized dignity not as a soft consideration to be addressed after financial targets were met, but as an essential component of those targets' sustainable achievement. Back at Atlas Airways headquarters the following week, Jasmine convened her executive team to review progress on the Dignity Drivers initiative launched in the wake of the viral moment. Implementation is exceeding projections across all metrics, Lucia Hernandez reported. Our new training program has been adopted by 12 airlines, 3 hotel chains, and 2 rental car companies. The expansion into adjacent industries wasn't part of our original plan, but the demand has been overwhelming. The program, which taught frontline staff how to maintain customer dignity during challenging situations, had evolved from an internal Atlas practice to an industry-wide movement. Over 20,000 customer-facing employees had completed the training with measurable improvements in satisfaction scores across participating companies. The financial impact is equally impressive, Jennifer Thompson added, displaying revenue projections on the boardroom screen. The training program has become a profit center in its own right, generating $4.2 million this quarter, while advancing our mission of industry transformation. Thomas Bradford, who had initially questioned the wisdom of sharing Atlas's proprietary approaches, nodded appreciatively. We've created a virtuous cycle. By teaching others to prioritize dignity, we elevate the entire industry experience, which in turn validates our business model and expands our market. Exactly, Jasmine agreed. Competition doesn't have to be zero-sum. When the entire industry improves its approach to customer dignity, everyone benefits: passengers, employees, and ultimately shareholders through sustainable growth. The conversation shifted to Atlas's expanding influence beyond commercial practices. The company had recently been invited to consult with the Department of Transportation on new regulations ensuring equal treatment of passengers regardless of fare class or demographic characteristics. We're rewriting industry standards, Lucia noted. 5 years ago, we were dismissed as idealistic outliers. Today, we're defining best practices for regulatory frameworks. This evolution, from operational innovator to industry standard setter, represented the fulfillment of Jasmine's original vision when founding Atlas Airways. She had always believed that business could be simultaneously profitable and humane, that dignity could drive value rather than drain it. The viral confrontation with Elizabeth Harrington had accelerated this transformation in ways Jasmine could never have planned. What might have taken years of gradual market education had crystallized in a single dramatic moment that perfectly illustrated competing business philosophies. Our Los Angeles to New York route, the one where the incident occurred, now has the highest customer loyalty score in our entire network, Jennifer reported. Passengers specifically request Flight 207, often mentioning they want to sit in the famous first-class cabin. The team shared a moment of quiet amusement at this unexpected outcome. What had begun as a potentially difficult customer interaction had transformed into a brand-defining moment and marketing advantage. The larger impact goes beyond Atlas, Jasmine noted, bringing the discussion back to industry-wide implications. Legacy Airlines has completely restructured their customer experience approach under their new leadership. Their Respect Across Classes initiative directly addresses the dignity disparities that the viral moment highlighted. Indeed, Legacy, once Atlas's most aggressive competitor, had undergone remarkable transformation after the public relations disaster and subsequent leadership change. Their new CEO, recruited from the hospitality industry, had publicly acknowledged the limitations of their previous approach and implemented changes modeled explicitly on Atlas's practices. They're still competitors, Thomas Bradford observed, but now they're competing on who can deliver the most dignity-centered experience rather than who can cut the most corners. That's a victory for the entire industry. The transformation extended to Pinnacle Consulting as well. After severing ties with Elizabeth Harrington, the firm had undertaken painful but necessary reassessment of their analytical framework. Their new balanced value assessment methodology explicitly measured how organizational changes affected customer experience and employee engagement alongside traditional financial metrics. Michael Westbrook reached out yesterday, Jennifer mentioned. Pinnacle is requesting permission to send a team to study our training approaches as part of their methodology update. It's quite a reversal from their previous position. Jasmine considered this development thoughtfully. Approve it. This isn't about competitive advantage through secrecy. It's about industry transformation through shared best practices. As the meeting concluded, Lucia raised a final point that perfectly captured the journey of the past 6 months. The Harvard Business Review is doing a feature on the business impact of the Atlas moment. They're calling it a case study in how a single authentic interaction can reshape an entire industry's approach to value creation. Later that afternoon, Jasmine took a rare moment of solitude in her office, reflecting on how a routine quarterly review flight had catalyzed such far-reaching change. She had never sought confrontation with Elizabeth Harrington or anyone else. Her approach had always been to demonstrate Atlas's philosophy through consistent action rather than public advocacy. Yet sometimes leadership required visibility, standing firmly in one's principles when directly challenged. That moment in Seat 1A had been such an occasion where remaining silent would have betrayed the very values Atlas was built upon. Her phone chimed with a message from Elizabeth Harrington, just finished guest lecturing at Columbia Business School on the limitations of traditional efficiency metrics. Students were particularly interested in our first meeting. Thought you'd appreciate knowing your message continues spreading through business education. The note reflected Elizabeth's own remarkable journey, from corporate executioner to thoughtful critic of the very analytical framework she had once championed. While she hadn't joined Atlas, as some had speculated she might, she had found a valuable role as a voice for balanced business assessment, someone who understood both traditional efficiency measures and their human limitations. Jasmine typed a brief reply. Education is how lasting change happens. Appreciate your partnership in expanding the conversation. Partnership. The word would have seemed inconceivable 6 months earlier. Yet here they were. Not friends, not even colleagues in the traditional sense, but partners in advancing a more complete understanding of business value. As Jasmine prepared for her next appointment, a meeting with international airline executives interested in implementing Atlas's training programs, she reflected on how her vision had expanded beyond her original ambitions. She had founded Atlas Airways to create a more humane flying experience. Now the company was helping reshape the very definition of business success across multiple industries. The Atlas moment had become shorthand in corporate America for authentic leadership and values-driven business practice. Business schools taught it alongside classic case studies of disruptive innovation. Industry publications referenced it when discussing the evolving metrics of corporate success, all because she had remained true to her principles in Seat 1A when it would have been easier to move to avoid conflict. Sometimes the most powerful leadership moments weren't planned strategic initiatives, but spontaneous demonstrations of values in action. 1 year after their first fateful meeting, Jasmine Reynolds and Elizabeth Harrington found themselves in an unexpected situation, sharing a panel at the Global Business Forum in New York. The session, titled Beyond Traditional Metrics, New Frameworks for Business Value, had drawn a standing room-only audience of executives, investors, and media representatives. As they waited backstage, an awkward silence hung between them. Despite their professional communications over the past year, this was only their third face-to-face meeting since the infamous flight. Strange to think it's been exactly 1 year, Elizabeth finally said, checking her watch. Almost to the hour. Jasmine nodded, her expression thoughtful. A lot can change in a year. That was undeniable. Atlas Airways had expanded to become the 6th largest carrier in America, their dignity-centered approach now widely emulated across the industry. Elizabeth had established herself as a respected voice on balanced business assessment through her consulting practice articles and guest lectures. "I never thanked you properly," Elizabeth said unexpectedly. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. For not destroying me when you could have." Elizabeth's typical polish faltered slightly. "You had every opportunity to make the situation worse, to escalate to publicly humiliate me beyond what I'd brought on myself. You didn't. That wouldn't have aligned with our values," Jasmine replied simply. "Most people's values get flexible when revenge is available." Elizabeth's observation came from hard-earned experience. "Revenge is inefficient," Jasmine said with a small smile, deliberately using the language of Elizabeth's former profession. "It consumes resources that could be directed toward positive change." The moderator approached, indicating it was time to take the stage. As they moved toward the bright lights, Elizabeth said quietly, "I'm still learning from you, it seems." The panel itself was remarkable, not for conflict, but for the nuanced conversation between two executives with profoundly different backgrounds yet increasingly aligned perspectives. Elizabeth spoke candidly about the limitations of traditional efficiency metrics, while Jasmine outlined how dignity-centered practices created measurable financial value. The fundamental question Jasmine explained to the audience is whether we view humans, customers, employees, community members, as resources to be optimized, or as partners in value creation. That perspective shapes every business decision that follows. Elizabeth nodded agreement. Traditional business education taught us to prioritize extraction over generation, to identify every possible efficiency regardless of its human impact. The challenge for modern business leaders is developing more balanced frameworks that recognize dignity as a driver of sustainable value rather than a cost to be minimized. The audience's engagement reflected how deeply this conversation resonated across industries. The questions focused not on the viral confrontation that had brought both women to prominence, but on the practical applications of their evolving business philosophies. After the panel concluded, Jasmine and Elizabeth found themselves sharing a car to the airport, an arrangement neither had anticipated but both had accepted with professional courtesy. "Your Foundation for Workplace Dignity launches next month," Jasmine asked as they navigated Manhattan traffic. Elizabeth nodded. "The irony isn't lost on me. The corporate executioner, creating an organization focused on maintaining dignity during organizational transitions. It's not irony, it's evolution," Jasmine corrected. "You understand both approaches, which gives you unique credibility when advocating for change." They rode in silence for several minutes, each reflecting on the unexpected trajectory that had brought them to this moment. "Atlas is expanding to international routes next quarter," Elizabeth finally asked. "Yes. London, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo initially. The same model, dignity first across all passenger classes and employee roles. The conventional wisdom said it wouldn't work domestically, let alone internationally," Elizabeth noted. "Yet your metrics show otherwise." "Conventional wisdom often confuses tradition with evidence," Jasmine replied. "People told me no one cared about being treated with dignity in economy class if the fare was low enough. Our load factors prove that assumption wrong every day." As they approached JFK, Elizabeth seemed to reach a decision about something she'd been considering. "I've been approached by several airlines about developing transition frameworks for shifting to more dignity-centered operations. I've hesitated to accept because it feels presumptuous given my history." Jasmine considered this thoughtfully. Who better to guide that transition than someone who deeply understands both approaches? "Your experience with Pinnacle gives you insight into the limitations of pure efficiency models. Your work since then demonstrates commitment to more balanced frameworks. You wouldn't consider it inappropriate." "Given how we met, the Atlas moment wasn't the beginning or end of either of our stories," Jasmine said. "It was simply a catalyst that accelerated changes already underway. Your work since then stands on its own merits." Their car arrived at the terminal. Before they parted ways, Jasmine to a flight to Washington, D.C. for regulatory meetings, Elizabeth to Chicago for a speaking engagement, they shared a brief but significant handshake. "Safe travels," Elizabeth Jasmine said with genuine goodwill. "You too," Elizabeth replied, then added with a hint of her old confidence. "Though I suspect any plane with you aboard automatically offers superior service." As they went their separate ways, both women reflected on the unexpected connection that had developed from their initial conflict. Not friendship in the conventional sense, but mutual respect forged through shared commitment to transforming business practice. Neither could have predicted this outcome when they had first encountered each other in the first-class cabin of Flight 207. Yet here they were a year later, aligned in purpose if not in position, both working to advance dignity as a core business principle rather than a peripheral consideration. Their journeys had become intertwined in ways neither could have anticipated. Jasmine as the visionary who had built a business model that challenged industry assumptions, Elizabeth as the converted skeptic whose very transformation lent credibility to the change she now advocated. Together they were helping reshape how business value was defined and measured across corporate America, an unexpected partnership born from confrontation but sustained through shared purpose. 2 years after the viral moment that changed both their trajectories, Jasmine Reynolds stood in the newly completed Dignity Center at Atlas Airways headquarters in Atlanta. The state-of-the-art training facility represented the culmination of a vision that had expanded far beyond her original ambitions for Atlas. The center would serve as both training ground and think tank, teaching dignity-centered business practices to executives from across industries, while researching new ways to measure and enhance the value of human respect in commercial settings. As Jasmine cut the ceremonial ribbon, she was surrounded by the people who had been part of Atlas's remarkable Journey board members who had supported her unconventional approach, early employees who had helped build the airline's distinctive culture, and investors who had backed her vision when industry experts deemed it non-viable. Standing discreetly to one side was Elizabeth Harrington, invited not as a central figure, but as someone whose role in the Atlas story had proven unexpectedly significant. 2 years ago, Jasmine addressed the assembled crowd. "We set out to prove that dignity creates value, not just moral value, but financial value. Today, our results speak for themselves." The metrics supported her assertion. Atlas had grown from a regional carrier to a major international airline with routes across 4 continents. Their customer loyalty metrics led the industry by substantial margins. Their employee retention rate exceeded industry averages by 42%, dramatically reducing training costs and service inconsistencies. "The Dignity Center represents the next phase of our mission," Jasmine continued, "not just demonstrating our approach through our operations, but actively sharing best practices across industries. Because when business becomes more humane for everyone, we all benefit: customers, employees, and yes, shareholders too." After the ceremony, Jasmine gave Elizabeth a private tour of the center, including a display that thoughtfully acknowledged the Atlas moment as a catalyst for industry-wide conversation about customer dignity. "You've presented it very diplomatically," Elizabeth noted, studying the exhibit that mentioned neither her name nor Pinnacle Consulting specifically. "It was never about individuals," Jasmine replied. "It was about competing approaches to business value." The exhibit emphasized the positive outcomes rather than the confrontation itself. The industry-wide reassessment of customer experience metrics. The regulatory reforms ensuring equal treatment regardless of fare class. The shifting investor perspective on the relationship between dignity and sustainable profitability. "Your foundation's work is referenced prominently," Jasmine pointed out, indicating a section on organizational transitions. Indeed, the Elizabeth Harrington Foundation for Workplace Dignity had become an unexpected force for positive change in corporate America. Drawing on Elizabeth's unique perspective as someone who had orchestrated countless downsizings before recognizing their human limitations, the foundation developed frameworks for maintaining employee dignity during necessary organizational changes. "We've trained over 200 companies this year alone," Elizabeth said with quiet pride, "teaching them how to handle difficult transitions without destroying the dignity of those affected." Her journey from corporate executioner to dignity advocate represented one of the most remarkable professional transformations in recent business history. Industry publications that had once profiled her ruthless efficiency now covered her thoughtful approaches to balanced organizational assessment. "I still review financial metrics and operational efficiencies," she explained, "but now within a framework that recognizes their human context and long-term implications." As they completed the tour, the two women found themselves in the center's main auditorium, where training sessions would soon begin for airline representatives from around the world. "I never imagined this outcome when I founded Atlas," Jasmine admitted, surveying the space designed to share their approach industry-wide. "I thought success would mean running one airline according to our values. I didn't anticipate helping transform the entire industry's understanding of value creation." The Atlas moment accelerated everything, Elizabeth observed. It crystallized competing business philosophies in a way theoretical arguments never could. Both women had been changed by that confrontation and its aftermath. Jasmine becoming more visible as a business thought leader than she had ever intended, Elizabeth undergoing fundamental reassessment of her professional identity and value framework. But the most significant transformation had occurred beyond them in how businesses across multiple industries now approached the relationship between dignity and value. Investment analysts explicitly assessed companies' dignity metrics alongside traditional financial indicators. Business schools taught balanced scorecard approaches that incorporated human impact alongside operational efficiency. Regulatory frameworks increasingly recognized dignity as a measurable component of service quality. "We're building something that will outlast both of us," Jasmine said as they prepared to rejoin the anniversary celebration. "A different understanding of business value." Elizabeth agreed. One that recognizes dignity not as a cost to be minimized but as an asset to be developed. As they walked toward the reception, Jasmine paused before a simple plaque installed near the center's entrance. It contained no names or dates, just a quote that captured the philosophy behind everything Atlas Airways had built. "Every seat carries a human worthy of dignity, regardless of class or circumstance." Elizabeth read it thoughtfully, then nodded with genuine respect. That's the legacy. Not buildings or balance sheets, but fundamentally changing how business values humanity. As Jasmine reached out to trace the engraved words with her fingertips, she thought of her father, the baggage handler who had never experienced first class, but whose wisdom had inspired an airline that was transforming how the industry treated all passengers. The small tribute etched into the armrest of Seat 1A had expanded into a movement that now touched millions of travelers worldwide. For both women, in their different but increasingly aligned ways, that legacy represented the most meaningful achievement of their professional lives. One that would continue evolving long after the viral moment that had catalyzed its acceleration had faded from public memory. The story of Jasmine Reynolds and Elizabeth Harrington isn't just about a confrontation in first class. It's about how one authentic moment can reveal competing visions of value, purpose, and dignity that shape our world far beyond a single flight or company. When Elizabeth approached Seat 1A, she brought with her not just personal entitlement, but an entire business philosophy that had dominated corporate America for decades. One that viewed efficiency as the ultimate goal, human dignity as a dispensable luxury, and value extraction as the path to success. When Jasmine refused to move, she wasn't just protecting her assigned seat. She was standing firm in a different vision of business, one where dignity creates sustainable value, where respect generates loyalty, and where success is measured not just in quarterly profits, but in human impact. Their confrontation became a catalyst because it perfectly crystallized a choice facing organizations across every industry. Will we treat humans as units to be processed efficiently, or as partners in creating lasting value? Will we measure success solely through traditional metrics, or develop more balanced frameworks that capture the full spectrum of business impact? Will we optimize for short-term extraction or build for sustainable growth? The transformation that followed, not just at Atlas Airways or for Elizabeth personally, but across corporate America, demonstrated something powerful. Dignity isn't just morally right, it's financially sound. Treating people with respect doesn't reduce profitability. It enhances it through loyalty, engagement, and sustainable growth. 2 years after their confrontation, we've seen this understanding reshape business practices across multiple industries. Companies that once dismissed customer experience as an unnecessary cost now measure it as a value driver. Organizations that viewed employee well-being as peripheral now recognize it as central to sustainable performance. Investors who focused exclusively on quarterly metrics now assess dignity practices as indicators of long-term viability. But perhaps most importantly, we've witnessed the power of standing firmly in your truth, even when it would be easier to move. Jasmine Reynolds could have switched seats to avoid confrontation. Instead, she maintained her dignity and in doing so catalyzed a movement that transformed far more than one airline or industry. That's the power of the Atlas moment. The recognition that sometimes the most meaningful changes begin not with grand strategies or elaborate initiatives, but with one person refusing to compromise their dignity or principles when directly challenged. Every day, each of us faces similar choices in smaller ways. Do we speak up when we witness someone being treated without respect? Do we challenge assumptions that prioritize efficiency over humanity? Do we measure success solely through traditional metrics or consider the fuller spectrum of impact our actions create? The legacy Jasmine and Elizabeth built together, from opposite starting points but increasingly aligned purpose, reminds us that transformation is always possible, that dignity creates sustainable value, and that standing firmly in your truth can catalyze change far beyond your immediate circumstances. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about authentic leadership and unexpected moments of truth. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated because of their appearance, only to discover they held more power or influence than anyone realized? Share your story in the comments below. And if you know someone who needs a reminder about treating others with dignity regardless of appearances, please share this video with them. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from seeing the consequences of assumptions played out in real time. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our weekly uploads of real-life moments that changed everything. Until next time, remember, your seat in life isn't determined by what others think you deserve, but by the integrity and dignity with which you claim it.